20 years ago, I caused my best friend's death. Yesterday, his brother knocked on my door. I've lived with this secret for 20 years, and writing it down feels like peeling off a scab. I've been pretending wasn't there. I'm not looking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just need to let it out before it eats me alive. Back in 2005, I was 17, reckless, stupid, and convinced that nothing bad could ever touch me. My best friend, Ryan, was the opposite. He was calm, level-headed, the kind of guy who'd remind you to wear your seatbelt before you even turn the key. We'd known each other since kindergarten. He was like a brother to me. That summer, everything was perfect, or at least I thought it was. We'd just graduated high school, and we were planning one last road trip before college. Ryan's parents had this old Ford pickup truck, and he'd convinced them to let us borrow it for a few days. We packed a cooler full of cheap beer, grabbed some snacks, and hit the highway. I remember the way the sun looked that day, bright and endless. The kind of day that makes you feel immortal. I was driving. Ryan didn't like that. He'd had a couple of beers already and thought it was better if I took the wheel. I hadn't had any yet. But an hour into the trip, we stopped at a gas station, and that changed. I cracked open a can, then another. I wasn't drunk. Not really. Just buzzed. That's what I told myself. We were laughing about some inside joke we'd had since middle school. Ryan was in the passenger seat, his feet up on the dashboard, singing horribly off-key to the radio. I glanced at him for a second. Just 1 second. That's all it took. The truck drifted. I didn't even notice until the tires hit gravel. Then there was the screech of metal, the explosion of sound, the world flipping over and over. When I woke up, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The truck was upside down. My head hurt. My hands were shaking. I called out for Ryan, but he didn't answer. He wasn't breathing. I remember the blood. I remember screaming his name. I remember trying to unbuckle his seatbelt, but it was stuck. By the time help arrived, it was too late. Ryan was gone. The police called it an accident. They said there was no proof of alcohol in my system, because by the time they did the test, too much time had passed. His parents never blamed me. His mom even hugged me at the funeral. That was somehow worse. Everyone told me to move on. It wasn't your fault, they said. But I knew the truth. It was my fault. I killed my best friend. After that, I couldn't stand being in our hometown. I left for college, then for another city, then another. Every time I started to feel stable, guilt would creep back in like a shadow. I'd see a truck like his, or someone who laughed like him, and it would hit me all over again. I tried therapy once. I lasted 2 sessions before I quit. The therapist said something like, "You need to forgive yourself. How do you forgive someone who took a life?" So I buried it. I built a new life, a quiet one. I have a small apartment, a decent job, no real friends. I don't let people get close, because if they knew, they'd see the blood on my hands. And then, yesterday, after 20 years of silence, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, my heart stopped. Standing there was Mark, Ryan's younger brother, the kid who used to follow us around everywhere, begging to tag along. He looked older now, of course, mid-30s, beard, sharp eyes, but I knew that face instantly. And when he said my name, it wasn't friendly. "We need to talk," he said. My knees almost gave out. I let Mark inside before I even thought about it. My body was frozen somewhere between shock and panic. 20 years of guilt suddenly felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. He didn't say much at first, just stepped inside, looked around my tiny apartment, and sat down at the table without waiting for an invitation. It was surreal. The last time I'd seen him, he was 30 and awkward, skinny, and crying at his brother's funeral. Now he was a man. His eyes, though, they were the same, blue like Ryan's, but colder. I tried to speak first. "Mark, hi." He cut me off. "You remember me?" It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Of course I do." He looked at me for a long time before saying, "I bet you didn't expect to ever see me again." He was right. I hadn't. In fact, I'd spent 2 decades doing everything possible to make sure I never did. Mark leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "I found you by accident," he said. "Kind of. My mom passed away last year. I was going through her old boxes, and I found a letter. From you." I froze. I'd written that letter years ago. It was a pathetic attempt at closure, a long apology. I never had the courage to send. I must have left it at Ryan's grave one night, hoping the wine would take it or rain would destroy it. But somehow, his mother had kept it. Mark's voice broke through my thoughts. "You wrote that you were drinking." I opened my mouth to speak, but he raised his hand. "Don't, just don't." I read every word. The air in the room felt heavier. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. "You said it wasn't an accident," he continued. "You said you were drunk, that you killed my brother." I swallowed hard. "Mark, I was a kid. I made a mistake. I didn't mean. You killed him. His voice cracked on the word. Silence filled the room. He stood up, pacing. All these years, my mom always said it wasn't your fault. She said Ryan loved you like a brother, that he wouldn't have wanted you to suffer. But you lied to everyone. You let us believe it was just bad luck. I wanted to explain. I wanted to tell him that I had lived every day since that crash wishing it had been me instead. But how do you say that without sounding selfish? He looked at me again, eyes glistening with something between rage and grief. Do you have any idea what that did to us? I didn't answer. Dad left 2 years after Ryan died. Said he couldn't look at us without seeing him. Mom never recovered. She smiled, but she was gone inside. And me? I grew up hating everyone. Hating you. I closed my eyes. I deserved that. He laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. You think saying that fixes anything? No. I said quietly. Nothing can fix it. He stared at me for a long time, then reached into his jacket pocket. For a moment, my heart stopped. I thought he might have a weapon. But instead, he pulled out something small and familiar. It was Ryan's watch. The same one he wore that day. The one I'd never been able to look at again. Mark placed it on the table between us. He was wearing this when you killed him, he said softly. The police gave it back to us after the crash. Mom kept it in a box all these years. I didn't know what to do with it. Until now. He pushed it toward me. Take it. You wanted to keep pretending the past didn't exist. Well, now it's staring you in the face. I looked at the watch. The cracked glass, the dried rust around the edges. My reflection warped in its surface. I don't want it, I whispered. Mark's jaw tightened. You don't get to decide that. For a moment, I thought he was going to hit me. Instead, he turned toward the door. Before leaving, he said one last thing. You should have died that day, not him. And then he was gone. When the door closed, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. My hands were shaking. The watch sat on the table, silent but screaming at me. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe hours. Maybe the whole night. Every tick in my mind sounded like Ryan's voice. He was right, I should have died that day. But I didn't. And now I had to face what was coming next. Because something in Mark's eyes told me he wasn't finished with me yet. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at Ryan's cracked watch until the first light of morning slipped through the blinds. The air felt heavy, stale, like it hadn't moved in years. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the crash again. The truck flipping, Ryan's body motionless beside me. The sound of twisting metal and breaking bones. The way his mother's voice cracked at the funeral when she tried to read his eulogy. And now his brother was back. I kept telling myself that maybe Mark just needed to say those words to get closure, like I'd always failed to. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. By noon, I finally stood up and decided to get rid of the watch. Maybe it was cowardly, but I couldn't bear to look at it another second. I wrapped it in an old t-shirt and walked it down to the dumpster behind my building. When I lifted the lid, I hesitated. Something inside me whispered that throwing it away wasn't going to fix anything. But I did it anyway. The watch disappeared into the trash, and I felt lighter for about 10 seconds. Then I saw him. Across the street, leaning against a car, was Mark, watching me. My stomach dropped. He didn't say anything, just stared. When he noticed I'd seen him, he smiled. Not a friendly smile. It was the kind that said, I know something you don't. Then he got into his car and drove off. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about a conversation. The next few days were strange. Little things started happening. My mail was open when it arrived. Someone called my phone late at night and hung up without saying a word. One morning, I found a note slipped under my door. He trusted you. No name, just those 3 words. I told myself I was being paranoid, but deep down, I knew who it was from. Mark wasn't done. On the 3rd day, I went to work like usual, trying to pretend everything was fine. But when I got back home, my front door was slightly open. I froze. Inside, the lights were off. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear myself think. I picked up the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a metal flashlight, and pushed the door open wider. Nothing looked stolen, but someone had definitely been there. The picture frame on my desk, the one of me and Ryan, taken a week before the accident, was missing. And on the kitchen table, in the exact same spot where I'd left the watch, was a new object. The watch? I swear my knees almost gave out. I'd thrown it away. I was sure I had. It was clean now, polished even. The crack in the glass still visible, but less noticeable. It was ticking again. I didn't touch it. I just stood there, staring at it, my skin crawling. That night, I barely moved. I sat in the corner of my living room with all the lights on, waiting for another knock on the door. But it never came. When morning finally arrived, I found another note slipped under the door. You can't bury the dead twice. That's when I knew Mark wasn't looking for an apology. He wanted revenge. I went to the police. I told them someone was stalking me, maybe breaking into my apartment. The officer was polite, but unconvinced. Do you have any proof? He asked. I didn't. No cameras, no witnesses. Just a story that sounded like guilt-induced paranoia. He handed me a card and said, if it happens again, call us. That was it. That evening, I called my therapist, the one I'd seen years ago. To my surprise, she remembered me. I told her everything from the letter to Mark's visit, to the watch showing up again. She was quiet for a while, then asked, do you think he's really there? Or could this be your guilt manifesting? I wanted to scream. He's real. He came to my door. She sighed softly. Then you need to protect yourself, set boundaries, and maybe, finally, tell the truth to someone else. But I couldn't. Who would believe me? That night, I heard a knock again. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. When I looked through the peephole, there was no one there. Only another note taped to the door. You owe him. I don't know how much longer I can take this. I don't know if Mark wants to scare me or destroy me, but I can feel something coming. Something worse than guilt. Something final. By the time the 4th night rolled around, my nerves were gone. I was living on coffee and adrenaline, jumping at every creak in the walls. The notes, the watch, the phone calls, they weren't just reminders anymore. They were warnings. I decided I wasn't going to hide anymore. If Mark wanted something from me, I was going to make him say it to my face. That evening, I sat in my dark apartment with the lights off, staring at the door. I had a baseball bat in one hand and my phone in the other, ready to call 911. The watch sat on the table again, ticking softly. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, at exactly 2:30 a.m., the door creaked open. I didn't even hear footsteps, just the sound of the door moving slowly. I jumped up, bat raised, heart hammering against my ribs. Mark, I said, my voice trembling. I know you're there. Silence. Then a low voice. Put the bat down. He stepped into the dim light of the street lamp outside. It was him, Mark. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked empty. His eyes were sunken, his hands trembling slightly. I'm calling the police, I said. But my voice cracked. You won't? He replied softly. You're too scared of what they'll find. That stopped me. What are you talking about? He closed the door behind him and stepped further in, his presence filling the tiny apartment. The truth. The whole truth. I already told you everything. I shouted. I was drunk. I lost control. Ryan died because of me. I've been punishing myself for 20 years. Mark stared at me, and then, to my shock, he laughed. Not a happy laugh, but a jagged, broken sound. You think that's the truth, he said. I blinked. What do you mean? Mark took a step closer, his voice low. Ryan didn't just die in that crash. He lived for 6 hours. 6 hours in the hospital before he died. You never came. You ran. His words hit me like a fist. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't run. I whispered. They told me I wasn't allowed back there. You left him, Mark snapped. You left him alone in a hospital bed. He kept asking for you, begging for you, and you weren't there. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. My hands started to shake. I didn't know. He knew, Mark said, stepping closer. He knew you'd been drinking. He knew you'd caused the crash. And do you know what his last words were? I couldn't speak. Mark's eyes burned into mine. He said, tell him I forgive him. The room went silent. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. My throat tightened until I couldn't breathe. Mark's voice cracked now, barely a whisper. I hated you for years. I imagined hurting you, killing you, even. But then I found that letter. And for the first time, I saw what you've been carrying all this time. He reached into his jacket again. I tensed. But this time, he didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a photo. A hospital photo. Ryan in a hospital bed, pale but alive. He wanted me to give this to you, Mark said. I never did. Until now. He dropped the photo on the table next to the watch. I stared at it, my heart breaking all over again. Ryan, still smiling faintly despite everything, with a bruised face and tubes in his arms. I don't understand, I whispered. Mark took a deep breath. I thought maybe if I scared you enough, you'd finally face it. That you'd finally see Ryan as more than just the moment he died. He forgave you. You need to forgive yourself. Tears blurred my vision. I don't know how. Mark looked at me for a long time. Then he said, quietly, start by living for him. Stop hiding. Stop running. Or you'll die long before your heart stops. He turned toward the door. Before leaving, he said one last thing. I'm done haunting you. Now it's your turn to do something with the life you stole. And then he was gone. I sat alone, staring at the photo and the watch. For the first time in 20 years, the crash wasn't the only memory I had of Ryan. I could see his face, his forgiveness, his brother's pain. The guilt was still there, but it was different, lighter, like a wound that had finally been cleaned. Even if it still hurt, I don't know what comes next, but for the first time in decades, I think I might actually try to live. It's been 3 months since that night. 3 months since Mark walked out of my apartment and left me with Ryan's watch and that hospital photo. Sometimes, I still wake up at 2:30 a.m., expecting another knock on the door, but it never comes. The silence feels different now, peaceful, not threatening. For the first few weeks, I didn't know what to do. I kept the watch on the table where Mark left it. It ticked quietly through the nights, a reminder that time was still moving, even if I'd spent 20 years pretending it wasn't. Then one morning, I did something I hadn't done since the accident. I drove. The first few minutes behind the wheel were pure terror. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold the steering wheel. Every sound, every movement of the car made my chest tighten. But I kept going. Not far, just out of the city, along an empty stretch of road. The air smelled like rain. The sky looked exactly like it had the day of the crash. And when I pulled over, I cried for the first time in years. I cried for Ryan, for Mark, for his parents, for all the lives I'd damaged. But mostly, I cried for the 17-year-old kid. I used to be the one who thought he was invincible and learned too late that he wasn't. That was the day I decided to start living again. I went back to therapy. This time, I didn't run. My therapist didn't say much during the first session, she just listened. When I finished, she said something simple that stuck with me. Guilt can destroy you, or it can guide you. You get to choose. So, I chose. I started volunteering at a youth driving safety program. I tell my story, the real story, without hiding behind it. Was an accident. I tell them what I did and what it cost. Sometimes the kids look uncomfortable. Sometimes they cry. A few even stay after to talk. One kid told me his brother had died in a drunk driving crash last year. He thanked me for being honest. That broke me in a good way. For the first time in 20 years, I felt like maybe Ryan would have been proud of me. A few weeks ago, I drove out to our old town. It felt smaller than I remembered. The streets were quieter, the people older. I parked near the cemetery and walked to Ryan's grave. Someone had already been there. Recently, fresh flowers rested at the base of the stone. Probably Mark. I knelt down and placed the watch beside the flowers. I didn't need it anymore. It belonged there with him. I'm sorry, I said softly, but I'm trying. I really am. The wind blew through the trees, and for a moment, it almost felt like someone was standing beside me. On my way back to the car, I saw Mark. He was leaning against his truck, just watching me. For a second, I froze. Then he smiled, a small, tired smile, and gave a nod. No words, just understanding. And that was enough. Life isn't perfect now. The guilt doesn't vanish, it just becomes quieter. Some mornings I still wake up with the crash echoing in my mind. But instead of drowning in it, I get up, make coffee, and keep going. Sometimes I catch myself talking to Ryan out loud, especially when I'm driving. It's not prayer exactly, more like a conversation that never really ended. He used to tell me, "Don't get stuck, man. The world's too big to stay in one place." For years, I ignored that. But now, I'm finally moving again. I don't know if anyone will ever read this or care. I just needed to say it to let it live somewhere outside of my head. If you're reading this, and you've ever done something you can't take back, I won't tell you it gets easy. It doesn't. But if someone could forgive me even from beyond the grave, then maybe you can learn to forgive yourself too. Because living isn't about forgetting what you did. It's about making sure you never waste the life you still have.